well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. It's great to have you with us today. You know, I kind of thought I was done with flannel for a few months, but we have had some unseasonably cool weather, rainy too, in Farmville. We're like day 4 of rain. And we have 3 more days before the sun comes out. I got to tell you, my goats and my bacon seeds and my chickens, they're all a little soggy at the moment. But thankfully, I am warm and dry and glad to have you with us today. Coming up on the program, we've got some of the latest news from around the nation in terms of our Second Amendment rights. Good news out of Louisiana. But I want to start, actually, before we get started with our news, we do have a message from the Donald J. Trump for President campaign. Trump campaign has a special offer just for you. President Trump wants to meet you. This will be the first opportunity that he has had to meet American patriots like you since our country started reopening. His team will cover the flight, hotel, and give you VIP access for yourself and a guest as well. He will even take a picture with you. All you have to do is text ENGAGE to 88022 today for your chance to meet President Trump. Again, that is ENGAGE, ENGAGE to 88022 to win this contest and to join President Trump in the fight to keep America great for 4 more years, paid for by the Donald J. Trump for President campaign. Now, on to today's program. It's been fascinating for me to watch the media reaction and the media coverage to some of the protests that have been taking place and the double standard that is emerging here. Guns in the hands of those who want to protect businesses, bad. Guns in the hands of protesters who have set up things like the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone or what's the CHOP acronym? Capitol Hill That'd be CHOT, I guess. I'm not sure what CHOP stands for, but if they have guns, that's okay. If people have guns to protect their small businesses, that's not okay. Let's take a look at 2 different headlines. This from the Crosscut. Both these headlines focused on what's going on in Washington State. AR-15s complicate anti-racism protests across Washington. While some businesses are asking for armed help, others say they want none of it. Residents, police, and city officials are also feeling the tension. So that's one headline. Then we have this from the Washington Post. The Seattle protest zone is police free, so volunteers are stepping up to provide security. Oh, that sounds so nice. One sounds like it's, Mad Maxian and dystopian, and the other, it just sounds so pleasant. Yeah, how about this? So this again from the Crosscut, just a little sample of the story itself. At the June 7th protest in Spokane, a man with an AR-15 walked around downtown alone, except for his unarmed friend who carried an upside-down American flag. He didn't want to provide his name or any identifying information, but he said he was an Army vet and he chose the AR-15 because it's the, quote, most efficient. He wasn't there to protect any specific businesses, he said, but was patrolling and hurting people for their safety. I mean, I know I look scary, he said, but what's the difference between a normal guy carrying a gun and the police officers carrying a gun? The increased presence of armed individuals and groups at protests are just part of a broader trend that the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence has seen in what it calls, quote, gun sanctuary movements, said Hannah Friedman, a litigation attorney at the National Public Interest Law Center. It's fascinating because the Washington Post, in its story about the security that is being provided at the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or whatever they're calling it now in Seattle, Washington, they didn't reach out to a single gun control advocate. Yeah. And they really downplayed the armed security taking place there as well. Here's what the Washington Post had to say. Firearms present a different challenge. Many of the volunteers are licensed gun owners, but bringing a weapon changes the dynamic. Mark Markinson, who is one of the folks there at the Capitol Hill protest, says if you're open carrying, de-escalation is more challenging because at that point, you're also a threat to anyone that you come to. But that can leave volunteers vulnerable, says the Washington Post. The Washington Post actually says being unarmed can make you vulnerable. Yeah, but apparently only if you have the right politics. Only if you have politics that mesh or align with the Washington Post can being unarmed leave you vulnerable. That can leave volunteers vulnerable. Sentinels say that they are particularly concerned about right-wing groups such as the far-right Three Percenters and the Proud Boys, a group that has made headlines for its part in violent clashes in Portland, Oregon, and New York. An uneasy compromise could be seen early Sunday when a Sentinel who gave his name as James Madison stood at the southern barricade with an AR-15 draped over his chest, as he has done on other nights. Madison said he was standing guard because of reports of a, quote, known threatening vehicle circling near the autonomous zone. We found the owner of that threatening vehicle's Twitter, and he clearly intended to do harm to the protesters based on his tweets, he said in a text message. There are a few of us who are armed. Okay. Well, look, here's the thing. I'm a Second Amendment. I'm not just a Second Amendment absolutist. I'm a Bill of Rights absolutist. And that means that in order for me to be consistent with my philosophy and my position, the people I disagree with have the exact same rights that I do. That's the way I look at it. Your rights are not contingent on your point of view or your political perspective or things of that nature. We are all Americans. We all possess these rights. The Bill of Rights doesn't have an asterisk attached to any of those first 10 amendments. Saying, well, okay, the freedom of speech and the right to peaceably assemble, except for these groups over here, or except for people who think this way. I mean, that's not the way it works. So I don't have a problem with, the armed citizens there at, I don't know who they consider themselves citizens to be. Like, are they citizens of the United States? Are they citizens of China? I don't know who they consider themselves to be citizens of, but I don't have a problem with anybody exercising their Second Amendment rights. What I do have a problem with is the double standard evinced by the media. That's where I have my problem. We talked about this a little bit yesterday at bearingarms.com, where, gun control advocates in Washington state, like Governor Jay Inslee, who have spoken up against the Second Amendment sanctuary movements, have said absolutely nothing about the fact that the CHAZ, or the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, is, in effect, its own Second Amendment sanctuary. Is it not? I mean, we saw the video of, Raz Simone, who's handing out AR-15s to people there without going through a background check. That violates Washington state law. May have been some, other violations of state law taking place there as well. And yet the governor hasn't said anything. Mayor Jenny Durkan hasn't said anything. Washington Post doesn't ask gun control advocates, hey, what do you think about, these violations of gun laws that are happening here? No. When it's the armed citizens protecting businesses, that's when the pearls get clutched. That's when the hands get wrung. That's when the fainting couch get pulled over. But when it is these protesters, when it is, the Antifa types who are carrying firearms, then all of a sudden the media has a very different impression of what's taking place. And I would argue that in both of these instances, whether it's somebody carrying an AR-15 to protect a business in Spokane, Washington, or an Antifa type carrying an AR-15 to protect their Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, those are both exercises of the right to keep and bear arms. And if the media has a problem with one of them, and only one of them, to me, again, that just reeks of the anti-gun agenda that the media tends to put in place. Now, why do I say that picking and choosing amounts to an anti-gun agenda? Well, because I believe, and again, I don't have a ton of evidence here, but I believe that eventually the media will turn, however reluctantly, on those armed protesters there at the CHAZ and elsewhere around the country. They'll say, oh gosh, I wish that you weren't doing this either. But they'll never actually call people who set up a sign at the entrance to the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone that said you're now leaving the USA. They'll never call that group insurrectionists, right? Going back to this piece at the Crosscut, talking about the hand-wringing of the armed citizens, they quoted, or they talked to someone with Giffords who, again, had issues with the Second Amendment sanctuary movement. Hannah Friedman, litigation attorney for Giffords. And the Crosscut writes, the zenith of the trend of the Second Amendment sanctuary movement was early this year in Virginia, Friedman said, when the newly Democratic legislature was poised to pass several gun safety laws, and thousands of gun rights activists protested. But, Friedman says, the presence of semi-automatic guns at a protest, like the commonly seen AR-15, is less about the Second Amendment and more about the message that it communicates. Friedman says, quote, they're more about what the firearm has represented over history as a symbol of white supremacy and as a symbol of white power and the threat of violence over non-white people in public spaces. That is the message that they're sending to the rest of the country. It's a reminder of this country's history. It's a reminder of this country's radicalized violence that really has nothing to do with anyone's lives, except for the people whose lives they're endangering by bringing these very dangerous weapons into public spaces. Okay, so again, when it's a Second Amendment rally, that is attended, by the way, not just by white Virginians, but by Virginians of all races, creeds, and colors. There were folks on the left. There were folks on the right. There were folks in the muddy middle. There were white, black, Latino, Hispanic, Asian Americans who were there in attendance exercising their Second Amendment rights. Somehow that's about white supremacy, right? But when it's Seattle and when it's Chaz, Hannah Friedman is silent. The gun control groups are silent. So if somebody carrying around an AR-15 in one case is an example in the minds of gun control advocates of white supremacy and a symbol of white power, well, what is it when a guy who calls himself James Madison has an AR-15 strapped across his chest at the Chaz? What is that a symbol of? What is that indicative of? To the gun control advocates, we don't know. Right? Is it an example of white supremacy? I can't imagine the gun control groups are going to go out there and target the left and attack the left and saying, you're just feeding into this myth of white supremacy and white power. On the other hand, they don't want to come out and endorse this. So instead, they simply remain silent. This is the double standard that I'm talking about here. When groups are able and willing to demonize one group of gun owners, and the other group of gun owners doing the exact same thing for basically the same reason gets a pass. That is a huge double standard. And I got to tell you, I was at that rally in Virginia back in early January, and it was pretty incredible to see. I had no idea what it was going to turn into. Governor Ralph Northam and others had, tried to scare the state of Virginia by declaring that this was just basically going to be a group of armed insurrectionists who were flooding into downtown Richmond, intent on rampaging through the city streets and pillaging the state capitol. That didn't happen. I mean, it was a boisterous, loud, but entirely peaceful gathering. There was one arrest made of a woman who was arrested, ironically enough, considering the circumstances we find ourselves in now, for violating the state's anti-mask ordinance. She was wearing a mask on a very cold January day. She was arrested. Ultimately, those charges were dropped, by the way. So with 20,000 plus, and that's a conservative estimate, I really think it was closer to 30,000. But with 20,000 plus gun owners in downtown Richmond, there were virtually no problems. Now, of course, since then, we've actually seen legitimate, real unrest in downtown Richmond. We have seen businesses destroyed. We have seen a lot of property damage, cars set on fire, buses set on fire. The police chief in Richmond just resigned under pressure from the mayor on Tuesday of this week after tear gas was deployed on, I believe this was Monday night, against protesters who really weren't doing much of anything. Richmond has become a real mess. And has nothing to do with the gun owners who were supposedly out in force in January, to send this sort of insurrectionist message. Again, that's another example of the double standard, where peaceful gun owners who are there lobbying their government in large numbers are attacked and portrayed as if they're dangerous individuals. Meanwhile, the people who are actually destroying businesses in downtown Richmond, they get a pass, right? So how do you respond to this? What's the right way to respond? I think you absolutely have to call out the media double standards when you see them, and speak up publicly. You also, I think we as gun owners, I would hope, and it's interesting, I've been thinking about a little bit over the past week or so. Because as a gun owner, as a Second Amendment advocate, for years, I have really tried to make what I do each and every day less about my own personal thoughts and my own personal opinions about whatever topic, and focus exclusively on our right to keep and bear arms. And in doing so, I've actually been able to have conversations and even friendships with people that I have big disagreements with politically. We don't have a lot in common, but when it comes to our right to keep and bear arms, we do. And, you know, in this divided society that we live in right now, aided and exacerbated, I think, by our media in large part. They love that division. They need that division. Conflict fuels ratings. So they don't want to see any sort of kumbaya moments. They don't want to see any commonalities, any common ground. I think it is actually up to us as gun owners to not only point out the double standards, but also to point out the common ground that we do have with people that we might disagree with politically. You know, I listen, I'm with you here. I disagree with you here, and here. But because we, again, share that right, and not only do we share that right, but we share a feeling that that right is important, that is some common ground that we can find. I don't think that's going to be enough to heal all of the divisions in this country. I don't think that's going to be enough to, you know, bring out rainbows and bluebirds, chirping in happiness, and we all come together in this, you know, wonderful, just great big nationwide hug. I'm not expecting that. I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think that we can help to reset the narrative and make it more about reality than the double standards, the glaring double standards, where the Second Amendment only applies to people who, you know, the media agrees with, that we have seen, unfortunately, become a far too common expression on the part of journalists around the country over the past couple of weeks. Now let's get to today's armed citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our what is it? I said what armed citizen story good deed? Oh, the recidivist report. Yeah, we can't skip the recidivist report. Before we do that, however, just a reminder that the Trump campaign has a special offer just for you. President Trump wants to meet you. This will be the first opportunity that he's had to meet with American patriots like you since the country started reopening. This is a pretty sweet deal. His team's going to cover the flight, hotel, give you VIP access for yourself and a guest. He'll even take a picture with you. All you have to do is text ENGAGE to 88022 today for your chance to meet President Trump. That is ENGAGE, ENGAGE, to 88022 for your chance to join President Trump, win the contest, and help keep America great for 4 more years. Again, this message is paid for by the Donald J. Trump for President Incorporated. All right, on to today's armed citizen story, our good deed of the day. And as I mentioned, our recidivist report. We will start there. Out of New York City, police sources, you may have seen this story, this 92-year-old who got shoved to the ground, ended up hitting herself on a fire hydrant. This guy's been arrested now. According to police sources, somewhere between 65 and 100 arrests for the 31-year-old man in question. Yeah, according to police sources, they tell CBS 2 that this guy's been arrested at least 100 times before and a slew of charges. According to the 92-year-old victim, she was just walking down the street, heading to a store, when the guy just pushed her. Didn't try to rob her, didn't try to, take anything from her, just pushed her down to the ground and then looked back as he walked away. She said, "I can't believe that someone would do this." She said, "Oh, he did look back. He did look back to see me fall on the floor, that rat." Yeah. The 92-year-old ended up at Mount Sinai Beth Israel Hospital. She said, hit me on the left side of the head. She said, my arm was all bloody. She said, the man did nothing except change my life and almost kill me. 31-year-old Rashid Brimage was arrested in Harlem on Tuesday. According to CBS 2, police say that he is a registered sex offender who's been arrested about 101 times. Some of those arrests include assault, harassment, resisting arrest, and persistent sexual abuse. Who's actually due in court next month for several arrests from earlier this year. But again, because of the no bail policies in New York City and in New York State, Brimage was, immediately released. according to the last time that he was arrested. And he's probably not going to be behind bars long for this crime as well, quite honestly. All right, on to our armed citizen story of the day from the Lake Elsinore, California patch, where a man who was shot after allegedly assaulting his partner in front of a Lake Elsinore shop owner is now in jail awaiting a court appearance. So this was not necessarily a case of self-defense, but more a case of defense of another. 31-year-old Vincent Benton of Lake Elsinore, California, booked on suspicion of second-degree robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, battery, inflicting corporal injury on a spouse or co-inhabitant, terroristic threats, receiving stolen property, vandalism, and violating probation. That is a laundry list of charges. Benton was taken into custody June 6 after sheriff's deputies responded to an area in the 100 block of Main Street in Lake Elsinore. Deputies learned that a man later identified as Benton was beating his female partner inside a shop. Sheriff's Department said the business owner intervened and the male suspect left the store, then returned minutes later. When he came back inside, Benton then pushed the shop owner to the ground, once again charged his partner, hitting and kicking her while she was on the ground, allegedly armed himself with a metal object and began striking the woman with that metal object. That's when the store owner pulled a firearm. Benton still came at him. That's when shots were fired. Benton was hit with one bullet in the abdomen. He then fled out of the business's back door. Deputies couldn't find him. They ended up having to use the local helicopter from the sheriff's department. Crews were called in to assist. He was found a few minutes later. Gunshot wound, non-life-threatening. Taken to a local hospital for treatment. He's now being held on $150,000 bail and is due back in court on July the 20th. No word on the condition of the woman that Benton was allegedly beating, but the shop owner there who came to both her defense and his own defense, not expected to face any charges. Finally, today, we've got a good deed for you out of the Garden State of New Jersey, where the Marlboro Police Department, two members of the Marlboro Police Department, saving a young woman from a burning vehicle in the right place and at the right time. This from the Marlboro Patch. Young woman, a 17-year-old from Freehold, New Jersey, was trapped in a SUV with its front end on fire. She was sitting in the back seat of this SUV when she was partially ejected from the vehicle, causing her to become pinned between two cars during the collision. Officers arrived on scene. They attempted to push the two cars apart with little success. Fire started to spread within that SUV. While officers tried to extinguish the vehicle fire, Officer Donna Gonzalez and I believe Lieutenant Robert Kelly Patrolman Robert Kelly used a patrol vehicle to push the two cars apart, successfully freeing that 17-year-old. Moments later, the SUV engulfed in flames. Victim airlifted to local hospital there with serious internal injuries. At last report was listed in critical but stable condition. Chief Peter Pizzulo of Marlboro's police department said if not for the officers' decisive action, the young lady pinned between the two vehicles would have undoubtedly perished. Officer Gonzalez and Officer Kelly acted with swift certainty and relied on sound judgment. I'm extremely proud of both officers, and I commend them for their actions. So again, in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. We thank those officers for their very good deed. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program today. Don't forget, you can subscribe to Town Hall Media on YouTube or Bearing Arms Cam & Company on Apple Podcasts. That way you never miss one of these programs. We will be back tomorrow with more of the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation, but we certainly do appreciate your support and appreciate you spreading the word. Be sure to share this on your Facebook page, your Twitter, your social media, and we'll be back tomorrow. Until then, be safe, be well, be free, and we'll see you soon with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company.